just, I just, I just speak my peace, keep my peace.
What's good, y'all? Welcome to the Speak My Peace podcast. As always, I'm your gracious host, Greg Lacey. Like we always do about this time, I hope this episode reaches you all in good health, good wealth, and that you are all taking care of yourself and your loved ones, because we know just how important that is. If this is your first time listening to the Speak My Peace podcast, welcome, and this is not welcome back. Shout out to all of my international viewership and listenership. I appreciate all y'all. I've been getting an influx of that from many different countries and continents, so I appreciate y'all. If this is your first time or you're a return listener and you're listening to the Speak My Peace podcast and you're wondering what's the purpose of this podcast, I want to read off a couple of names for you all. The first name is Alice Ball. The first name is Alice Ball. The second name is Benjamin Banneker. The third name is Uncle Nearest. And the fourth is not a name, or it is a name, not a name of a person. The original Dixieland Jazz Band. And you all may say, well, what the hell? How does that answer the question of the purpose of this podcast? Let me get to it. The first name that I want to read off or explain is the original Dixieland Jazz Band. So the original Dixieland Jazz Band is credited for the first jazz record ever, because it was they released the first commercially trafficked, distributed jazz record. The Dixieland Jazz Band, original Dixieland Jazz Band, is a band full of white people. You all may say, well, I've heard jazz. Jazz don't seem like something that can be created by white people. And you are correct. White people did not create it. However, as you can guess, in 1917, Black people didn't have that many resources. So you can't release a commercial jazz record. Even if you had the money to record it, what radio stations are going to play a record from a jazz band, from a Black jazz band? So while the original Dixieland Jazz Band is widely credited for the first ever jazz record, they are not the first recording of jazz or the invention of jazz. And so that history can kind of get skewed. The actual origin of jazz, and I'm mad that I don't remember it because I took an intro to jazz during my undergrad many moons ago. I forget who the actual first recording of jazz is, but it's so skewed because there are so many implementations of and mixes between jazz and blues. However, I can assure you that a white band was not the first people to record or invent jazz. What's the next name I'm going to go with? Benjamin Banneker. Benjamin Banneker was a Black architect in Washington, D.C., hired by the first president ever, George Washington. Shout out to my birthday twin. Benjamin Banneker was more than an architect because he was just a genius. He was a man of just many skills and trades. However, he was hired by George Washington, commissioned by George Washington to design the layout for Washington, D.C. He was working on a team with another, I don't know if he was an architect, but his name was Pierre Lafont, I believe. Benjamin Banneker designed the layout for Washington, D.C. and was working with this man, Pierre. And in the midst of creating these plans and mapping out the plans for Washington, D.C., Pierre quit the team. And with him quitting the team, he takes the plans that Benjamin Banneker has been working on along with him, and he just gets away from it. And so, in the result of that, Benjamin Banneker, this Black architect, luckily had remembered literally everything that he had did to create the layout for Washington, D.C. as we know it today, and just recreated the plan. However, if you ask someone, if you Google it, if you look in historical texts, they will accredit Pierre for creating or designing, quote unquote, Washington, D.C., because this is a white face, opposed to giving credit to this Black man, this Black genius, who was the other person that I was naming. Alice Ball. Alice Ball was responsible for successfully creating a leprosy treatment while she was studying um, at the University of Hawaii. However, she unfortunately passed at a young age. I believe she was 23 or 24 years old, a black woman. And in her passing, the president of not United States, the president of the University of Hawaii took her research and published it, and is widely credited for a while, because they ended up correcting it, was widely credited for finding this treatment for leprosy, and was credited for finding this treatment of leprosy, rather than as a black woman who actually found and didn't have time to publish it because of her untimely death. The next name, Uncle Nearest. You all know Jack Daniels. You may go out and drink. You may ask for a Jack and Coke. You may just be chilling at home and you want some whiskey. You may get some Jack Daniels. Jack Daniel is the name of the man who owned the distillery that published this concoction. However, the person that taught Jack Daniels how to distill whiskey was a black man named Uncle Nearest. I believe his real name was Nathan Green, but he's affectionately known as Uncle Nearest. Now, this is not like the past 3 cases of where something was stolen and then published and given credit to a white person. However, Uncle Nearest's contribution to teaching Jack Daniels how to distill whiskey is often missed. It's not often told. Although this black man taught this man who owns a distillery how to do it, he should not be overlooked. So those are, I gave you four examples. The reason why I give you those 4 examples is because in America, for the past 400 years, its history has been rewritten to give credit to white people for things that they have no business being credited for. The purpose of this podcast is to share stories of people like you and me who often are underrepresented, are often overlooked, and are often dismissed. This podcast, when I first created it, allowed me a space to shed light on those stories, to give my account for those stories, and to give a space to where I can inform, educate, and welcome those stories. Because too often we hear people tell stories as it regards to us about people that look like me or people that look like you and may come from communities that look like the community that I grew up in or similar to it all across the world. They're often telling stories about people from these places without ever stepping foot in these places or without looking like us, without having our walks of life. And what happens when you do that is you speak from you often speak from a place of ill intent, meaning that you see these people as statistics, you see these people as a story on a page, and you often dismiss the human aspect of us. You often dismiss the fact that we are humans and we have feelings, and there are circumstances that put us in these places, and there are circumstances that keep us in these places. Like, you can be a news anchor and read a story about violence going on in a specific neighborhood, and you will just cover, oh, this is a 3rd or 4th crime that happened over the past 5 nights in this area. However, you will dismiss the fact that, like, how do we get here? We will dismiss the fact that, like, we are in these neighborhoods, and while we are in these neighborhoods, there aren't many opportunities for jobs. So we have to go into other neighborhoods or other cities to find opportunities because there isn't much revenue being pumped into our neighborhoods because there aren't job opportunities. So that's one thing. You will dismiss the fact that, like, okay, this person got arrested for, let's say, not G, D-U-R, damn, I can't spell, D-R-U-G possession. However, you would dismiss the fact that, like, this person has been hustling for the past 10, 15 years because they grew up in a household where it was 5 people, one mom, 4 kids, and the mom is busting her butt to make ends meet. Remind you, there aren't many opportunities within the neighborhood, so she got to go elsewhere to seek those opportunities. And she's still having a hard time. She's still struggling to make ends meet to put food on the table. So at 12, 13 years old, the oldest sibling in the house has said, well, I got to go out and figure out a way to make money. So he starts hustling, whether that's selling candy at school, whether that's selling memorabilia, whether that's selling, whatever the case may be. They just decide they had to go out and hustle to help their mom. And that leads to something that he just continues to do for 10 years. You would dismiss the fact that, like, oh, this person had to step outside to, go help the household. And this is something he just kept on doing. You will dismiss the fact that, like, the reason why this mom is struggling to keep afloat is because she's a single parent mother. Not realizing, like, there's 10 to 15 single parent households on this block because all the fathers have been incarcerated for similar or same offenses. So when you tell these stories, you dismiss the human aspect of our circumstances. And this podcast is a space to shed light on that, to share my point of view, and also share you all point of view. In America, history is constantly rewritten. The formation of America is built on rewriting history to build up a certain people to look a certain way. However, if you look back in American history, literally since its formation, it's been built on lies, treachery, and and thieves. Just think about just the formation of American history. America was, quote unquote, discovered by this idiot explorer who thought that he landed in Asia. However, he landed on this land and found what we know today as America. However, America was once indigenous to Mexicans and Native American. Well, I think somebody told me that and Native Americans is an incorrect term. So, excuse me for being ignorant, but I guess natives. America was once natives to indigenous people, which were Mexicans and the people who we call Native Americans, but that is, as I learned recently, the politically incorrect term. When those people were founded here, America quickly decided to take the land from those people because they discovered this quote unquote new land. So they decided to off some people. They stole land from people. They forced people into certain pockets within this country and now claim this as America. That was the history of this idiot explorer that people celebrate. They literally celebrate that he discovered this land and built what we know as America today, even though there was so much dark around his quote unquote discovery. And so they will ignore the fact that this land was native to certain people at a certain time, and that these people were offed. These people, their land was stolen from. These people was forced into certain parts so that they can build up what we know as today as America. They will ignore the fact that, like, a large portion of Southern America was Mexico. A lot of that land was stolen. A lot of those people were offed. A lot of battles happened as Mexico tried to maintain their stronghold on what they knew as Mexico for a certain point. We will ignore the history of the Alamo. We will ignore the history of the Mexican-American War. To where now in 2025, we are at a point to where the agenda of our current administration is keeping Mexicans out of America, something that was once their native land. And so history is constantly being rewritten to paint a certain group of people in a specific light. The reason why I speak about this is because a couple of months ago, I seen this thing happen that rubbed me the wrong way, but I kind of ignored it. But then multiple things started happening. I was like, okay, well, I got to speak on this. If you all don't know, I hold Jackie Robinson to a very high regard. I know I speak about Malcolm X a lot on this podcast. I've spoken about Jackie Robinson in the past too, but I hold those two people to a very high regard. Just the way that, from accounts from other people, of how they carried themselves, how they lived their lives, the sacrifices they made in terms of putting themselves in harm's way to better the quality of life for the people that come decades beyond them, generations beyond them. Like, I admire the sacrifices they made to better the quality of life for us and the things that they fought for. Like, I am very inspired by them. And they're not the only one. Obviously, there are many freedom fighters, but those are the two people that I just really just gravitated to at a very young age. That being said, Jackie Robinson, if you all don't know, prior to him breaking an MLB color barrier and going on to have this great MLB career, he was an officer in the Army. He served as I believe, second lieutenant in the Army. So that was his career prior to, going to baseball. A couple months ago, every mention, every article that related to Jackie Robinson was removed from the Department of Defense's website with no explanation initially and no reasoning, just wiped away. And many publications found this out and raised their eyebrows and started publishing articles about it, like Jackie Robinson was just wiped off the DoD websites. And this had gone on, I believe, for like a day and a half, and then it was finally restored. But when I heard about that, I was like, that's interesting. What's the reasoning for that? Because there was no reason. It was just wiped away. An American hero, a veteran, someone who put their life on the line multiple times for this country as a military member and as a baseball player. Like, he probably faced more danger being a baseball player than he did serving this country. But he made the ultimate sacrifice. That's why this country holds veterans and hold military members to the high regard they hold them to, because they made the quote-unquote ultimate sacrifice. They signed up to put their life on the line to protect the quote-unquote freedom of America. Yet we have this man here who made the ultimate sacrifice in two different fields being erased from the Department of Defense's website. And this is something that was being ordered by number 45. Not specifically just Jackie Robinson, but just specifically removing certain things from the website. The explanation was that they wanted to remove any web pages that promoted diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because we know that has been something that's been hot since this man has been in office again. Something that his administration has been pushing for so long in terms of rollback on DEI. We don't need that anymore. So that rubbed me the wrong way, because here we have this national treasure, someone who has a Presidential Medal of Honor. I think he has the Medal of Honor or Medal of Freedom. I don't know what it's called, but just we want to erase part of his legacy for the sake of we don't want anything that includes diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because Jackie Robinson's story is that. Jackie Robinson's story is DEI. He put his life on the line in two different fields to better the quality of life, not only for me and you, but just America in general. He broke the color barrier in MLB, going to games every day, people throwing things at him, people hurling racist remarks at him, putting his family's life in danger for the sake of people who come later down the line, a Ken Griffey Jr., a Barry Bonds, a Mookie Betts, whoever you want to call him. He made that sacrifice for those people so that we can enjoy the sport today. The next thing that rubbed me the wrong way was a couple months ago as well, I started to see articles of protest that was happening outside of the National African American Museum in D.C. Full stop. If you all have never been to this museum, I highly recommend it. I can't say enough about just how great this museum is. This museum, just from even before you get into the museum, like the outside of the museum, the design of the museum is probably one of the greatest. I'm just gonna say American museum because I've only been to American museums. The outside of the museum is probably one of the greatest design concept structures I've ever seen. The inside of the museum is a whole nother story. It's probably one of the most immersive experience I've ever been through. The museum in itself is 4 stories. So there's 3 main stories, and then there's a bottom, like a conclusion, and then there's a cafeteria down there too. So it's really 3 stories, but it's 4 stories because there's like a conclusion and then a cafeteria. I'm gonna get to the conclusion in a little bit. So the museum is literally a trip of the past 400 years of African Americans, from being in Africa to being brought to this continent to finding freedom from being enslaved people to getting acclimated to society, to the contributions they made to the society after, getting freedom, to the contributions we continue to make to society, and where we are today in this present day and age. And it's a journey from our arrival to today. And that's what the 3 stories include. It's like I probably experienced maybe like 80% of it, and it took me about 2 or 3 hours. I think the full thing, it may take like 4 hours, maybe 3.5 to 4 hours, but it took me about 2 or 3 hours to get through the entire thing. There's a lot of things that you take in this museum, and it's very informative, and it's a fun experience. And so after you go through like the journey of 400 years and you get to the very bottom, I'm not going to spoil it and tell you what's at the very bottom, but there is something at the very bottom that's like, we are here now, and then if you want to eat, there's a cafeteria. But honestly, one of the greatest experiences I've ever had in any museums. So I highly encourage you all to go. Back to my story. So a couple months ago, I've been seeing articles about protests that was going on outside of this museum, the National African American History Museum. And I was curious as to like, well, what's a protest in regards to? And literally, I found out the protests were in regards to people fighting to keep artifacts in the museum because artifacts were being removed from the museum. And that kind of like intrigued me, like, well, why are we removing artifacts? Because I know that usually, if you're removing an artifact, it's because you're giving it back to its rightful owner. Because a lot of times, especially when people pass away, the estate will lend artifacts to museums for a specific amount of time. So let's say that like someone passes away and they may have this memorabilia. They lend it to the museum for 4 or 5 years. So after that 4 or 5 years are over, you give it back to its rightful owner. But that's not what's going on. These artifacts are literally just being removed for the sake of being removed. And so I said, I've never seen or heard of this happening. Just artifacts just being removed from the museum just for the sake of them being removed. So I looked into it, obviously, like, okay, well, why are they being removed? And I found out, and I found out that there was this executive order that was being passed by this administration, number 45 again, to rewrite history. That's literally why the artifacts are being removed, to rewrite history. I'm looking down on my phone. I apologize to my YouTube viewers. I'm looking down on my phone because I want to read this verbatim rather than give you all a snippet of what I'm thinking. The executive order restoring truth and sanity to American history aims to reevaluate how American history is presented in federal institutions, particularly the Smithsonian Institution and national parks. It seeks to counter narratives that portray American history as inherently flawed and instead promote a more positive view of American values, achievements, and progress. Key provisions and goals. Targeting the Smithsonian. The order directs the Vice President, who is a member of the Smithsonian Board of Regents, to work to eliminate divisive, anti-American ideology from the Smithsonian. This includes reviewing exhibits, programs, and research centers to ensure they align with a more positive view of American history. Focus on American expansionism. The order emphasizes the greatness of achievements or progress of American people and seeks to highlight the positive aspects of American history, particularly its commitment to liberty and prosperity. Combating divisive ideology. The order expresses concern about the narratives that portray American values as inherently harmful and oppressive, particularly those that focus on race and identity. I'm going to read that again. The order expresses concern about narratives that portray American values as inherently harmful and oppressive, particularly those that focus on race and identity. The current administration is seeking to erase anything that portrays American values as inherently harmful and oppressive, particularly those that focus on race and identity. Essentially saying that America's values weren't built on harm. So this country was not founded by this idiot explorer and stolen from these indigenous people. Not only stolen from these indigenous people, there was mass, I'm trying not to say certain words that I want to be flagged, but there was mass offings of these indigenous people. A lot of people lost their lives in order to gain this land that we know as America today. When Black people gained freedom, there was literally wars behind whether or not we should be free. After those wars was over, this country was then divided into Black and white and colored, I should say. People were literally off for stepping out of line. By stepping out of line, I mean freedom, fighting for freedom, saying that we should be afforded the same values, the same quote unquote American values that other people have been afforded, which was Malcolm X's fight. You can't give me freedom because that was God given. It wasn't man made. This country was built off the backs of colored people, Black people. Indentured servants, enslaved people built this country. However, we want to erase the fact that they've done so. I know there's a lot of conversations going on around reparations. So while I wish that my people get reparations, I personally don't think we will ever get it. Why I don't think so is because America has never owned its participation in the transatlantic slave trade. You can't give reparations for something that you've never participated in. While America has agreed that the transatlantic slave trade was terrible for a certain group of people, they never admitted that they had anything to do with it. You don't believe me? You can go read for yourself. Google it. And the closest we ever came to it, I believe, was when Barack Obama was in office, and there was a statement following the 13th Amendment. I forget what the documentary was called that Ava DuVernay produced, but there was this statement that came out and it said that, like, essentially slavery was terrible, and we're sorry that Black people have gone through this. But they have never said that, yes, this country was built off the foundation of slavery. Yes, these financial institutions was built off the foundation of slavery, and we are sincerely apologetic off of the trauma that has caused many generations, the strain it has put on many lives, the lives that it had claimed. America in itself has never claimed that. So how can they give reparations for something that they have never participated in? This country was built on lies, deceit, and harmful actions, fatal actions. Yet they don't want American values to be portrayed as harmful and oppressive. This country was built on oppression, oppressing a certain race of people. Yet we don't want America to be seen as this. As we get out of here, in closing, I want to say this is why I push so hard for representation. We can't allow people to tell our stories, because when they tell our stories, a lot of times we get dismissed. A lot of times the wrong stories get told. And a lot of times credit goes to the wrong people. We have to tell our stories. And this is why I push for representation so much. You can't have a black person telling the story of a Mexican. You can't have a white person telling the story of a black person. You can't have a white person telling the story of anybody other than a white person, because what happens a lot of times is that they're going to portray themselves to look a certain way. And I'm saying a white person, I don't mean this in general, but you get what I'm saying in terms of just the misrepresentation of people. We can't allow people to tell our stories. We can't allow platforms to share our perspectives. We can't allow these people to continue to rewrite our history. They can do whatever they want in the public, but we have to continue to tell our stories. We have to continue to inform ourselves. We have to continue to educate our youth, because if we don't do that, our history gets erased slowly but surely. And that is currently what's going on in this country, is these things are being erased. When you are removing artifacts from museums because they tell a story of oppression, that's a problem. The stories of oppression is our story. We were oppressed for so long, and despite that, we are still climbing this mountaintop. We are still pushing to be regarded as people, as humans. Despite everything that was stacked up against us, we are still striving. We are still going on to accomplish many great feats in many different fields all across the world. Yet you don't want to be seen as oppressive. That oppression is our story. The same way that a young basketball player's adversity is their story. You know, growing up and not having the most resources and deciding to go out and just shoot every night for 500 shots a night, and now you're the best basketball player in the world. That adversity is that person's story. The same way that oppression has been our story. We were an oppressed people. And despite all these odds stacked up against us, we are still here, still standing and still strong. Shout out to Derek Luke and Antoine Fisher. I want y'all to remember that. And this is not a story specifically for black people. This is for all colored people, even though I don't like the word colored people, or people of color, I should say. Why the hell am I saying colored people? This is a story for all people of color. If you allow them to write your story, they're going to paint those pictures and those narratives of them looking a certain way to big themselves up. Don't allow that to happen. This is why I push for us to tell these stories, and this is the purpose of the Speak One Piece podcast, because we have this thing going on in this country right now to where history is being rewritten, and we cannot allow that anymore. We have to tell our own stories. We have to highlight our own stories. We have to educate our youth on our history. Because as time progresses, these things are being erased, and they are going to paint this picture of America as being this euphoria, this euphoric state of being up in this place of just bliss. And it's not been that. It has not been that, and it is not that. So don't allow it. As we get out of here, man, I don't have a specific what to watch, but go watch something produced by somebody who comes from neighborhood you come from, similar walks of life, similar skin color, similar ethnic background, similar racial background, similar religious beliefs. Just go watch something that you feel is important to you. This is why, honestly, shows like The Wire and Snowfall, I feel like, are so great. I didn't grow up in Washington, D.C. I didn't grow up in Maryland. I didn't grow up in Virginia. However, watching The Wire, I have a great idea. Damn, that's probably not even a good example because The Wire was created by a white person. But the show, it captures just real life of what I can figure Baltimore to have been like back then. It doesn't tell the story of this cinematic thing. It tells real life accounts of many people. The Wire doesn't have a specific villains. The Wire doesn't have specific heroes. Like, you can look at people like Stringer Bell. In one aspect of his life, he's seen as progressive. In another aspect of his life, he may be seen as a demon. But that duality is something that we possess as a people. The Wire in itself doesn't have any main protagonist or antagonist. It's just a bunch of people and a supporting cast of people that you can grow attached to. The same thing with Snowfall. Snowfall happened in a time that was way before my age. However, it is very believable because it was created by someone who grew up in this era, telling the stories that I may have heard, that you may have heard of people during this time. And it represents those people very well. So go watch. That's my what to watch. Just go watch something that you feel comfortable watching, that you feel like represents you, or something that you're interested in. That's a Speak on Peace podcast for this week. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. I'm out.